Let's get into it. This was the final bit of reading that we've had to do for this beautiful love story, right? That surpasses probably what we knew or we thought that a love story was going to look like in this setting, right? I just want to dive right into it. Do we like the way this book ends? Do we like it? Are we feeling it? Is there anyone that's like, I'm not moved, but I enjoyed this part, or this really shook me to my core, or this was so disappointing?
I enjoyed it. I was surprised that she became a nun, but I enjoyed the ending because sometimes ending either surprises me and I love it, or sometimes surprises me and I think it's corny and predictable. It was not predictable that I liked.
Can you become a nun in a day? Can you just walk
I don't think so, but I have to say it made me think of it made me think of something. I remember once I was watching a show, this Oprah, and my image of nuns, I went to Catholic school for a few years in my life, was that you were all this pure type. People said, no, we used to go out, buy designer bags, we changed our mind and became nuns. And I thought of that when I was reading the book. that virginal nun, they were like, no, we were not like that, all of them. So yeah, I thought of that when I read this book.
Right, because is it the idea that like, oh, a woman with her experience can still sort of choose that path?
Yes, and I like that. When I saw that, I think it was an Oprah show a while ago. I'm like, those women, and she was just saying, I'm shocked. You know, you have this image of the nuns of the people who was this quiet girl in school that always knew she wanted to be a nun, and that's it. No, we've had sex, we did everything, and we changed it. We became nuns. So it was nice. It reminded me of a movie from the 50s called The Nun Story too. So I thought of that a lot. It was funny.
Right. The idea that like these women have had lives that have led them to this path or led them to Christ, or however one wants to name it. But like, it doesn't necessarily come from not having a life or not having experience,
right?
Not knowing sin. It's really like committing to Christ because you know, right? Like what?
Yeah, there tends to be that assumption, I think. Or I had it anyway, so.
Right. Do we think she's really committing to Christ in a certain way? Like, do you think she's in love? And Paula's naming that she loved the nun story. So shout out to the nun story in that reference, Yannick.
Yeah, I want to watch it again now.
Do we think she's doing it for like this religious, spiritual commitment? Is that why she's become a nun? Do we believe that?
I don't think there's any way. I mean, let me take that back. All journeys are personal, but it felt too fast. Like it didn't feel like there was. I understand that sometimes, you know, post-trauma, you do make decisions based on, you know, things that have just happened to you. But that whole process just seemed too fast. Like, you know,
kind of unrealistic.
Even the thought process, not just the conversion, or I'm using the word conversion loosely, of becoming a nun. But you would think there would be a much longer process towards that decision, or at least the writer would have mentioned her leanings or thoughts about it earlier in the book, so it doesn't come as much as a shock.
A total shock, yeah.
It was very overnight. I mean, as much as I tried to focus to respect the whole story, that my whole thing is like, you know, you could have had a real life and become a nun, but it was rather quick, even though it's a book, or like you watch a movie, things happen, same thing overnight. It takes away from it being realistic. I mean, you know, but I think the whole idea was that she went back to the life of this priest, I remember, who I can't remember his name, that they helped her. That's what she was, I guess. She had two choices. She had the women who were prostitutes that gave her advice, and this, and in the church, she learned how to be an artist. It's just that it happened so quickly. It wasn't smooth enough, so it made it seem so unrealistic. Otherwise, it would have been realistic, you know, if they showed. I see what you're saying.
Thank you, Yannick. Renee, I see you with your hand up.
But wasn't it, I mean, it wasn't that something, being a nun, something she wanted to do all the time? No, I just got that feeling. Because on page 254, what's her boyfriend. He said he suspected that she dreamed of wearing all her life a secret dream he knew she held without her ever articulating it. So I just had a feeling it was something she wanted to do.
And you think that that part is in reference to her wanting to be part of a nun or like join that sort of ministry?
Yeah.
I remember reading that, but it's that came out of nowhere too. It's like, what did, there was no explanation why he thought that. Like, did they have a bad sex life or something? And he was like, well, that's not what her, maybe she wants to do something else. It's like all of a sudden he always knew that, but there was nothing in her art, maybe her artwork. Even if they talked about her artwork showing churches or something, it was like, it kind of came out of nowhere. I will say that.
Yeah, I thought that she was an art. When I read that part, I thought because she was an artist and the idea of her wanting just to do something more in general, where her life may be something that he can't fulfill for her. Anais, though, I saw you move. I saw you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I read it a little differently because, as I remember, I don't remember what page it's on right now, but after she visits his parents, Elaine's parents, and she almost gets killed for it. She gets in the car and she goes to the convent. And it's like she knows where the convent is. And as I remember it, when the Mother Superior opens the door, she welcomes her daughter home. It's like, go to your room. Like she lived in the convent.
Yeah.
Like in those 10 years that after she met the Monsignor and he brought her in, and then the whole thing with the art, the art and the stained glass making, from that section, not before, but right there, when she goes to the convent, it's like, go to your room. It's like she lived in the convent. And it seems like at one point she was headed in that direction of being a nun, and that she did something different. She went out into the world and she became an artist, and she grappled with with her integrity. And for me, like, it was her coming home to herself. It felt very natural to me from what they were saying there, like about how she kind of grew up in the convent, and those struggles that she was having with her integrity, like how her father taught her, to have integrity, like that whole thing about him putting her to sleep and telling her stories and, kind of giving her a philosophy of life. And then after the earthquake, I can't remember exactly where she's like struggling with how, that she was an adulteress, that she felt so much shame that,
Yes,
she
I remember
married the
that.
president, but that she then had that last fling with Elaine. And it felt like she was really struggling with her choices, that whole thing about, get the gold, the pot of gold, and how she was raised by the prostitutes and don't be stupid, like, you got to go, you got to get something for yourself. And that she was really I thought she was kind of like really tortured by her choices out in the world.
Yeah.
And then when all that stuff happened and she goes back to the convent, it's like, right, this is the answer. I don't want to be in this, like place where I'm not, being true to what I believe in, what she was raised to believe in. So for me, it was very natural, he didn't give it to us at the end till the end, but that's how he decided to write the book, to throw all that at us at the very end, and have it, kind of come together in that way. I thought it was very beautiful. I just love the end of the book. I thought it was spectacular. Then, especially in the epilogue, where you see that, he didn't even have to give us an epilogue. And he gave us that. And it was so beautiful. Like the relationships and her having the baby, and then the baby being raised, by Alain, and then her becoming the aunt. I mean, it was just like staying in her daughter's life, but staying true, that could have been an opportunity for her to leave the convent, when she found out she was pregnant. But that was, to me, that was such an amazing decision, you
Right.
know, to have the baby, to give it to him, to stay in the baby's life. Anyway, that's how I read it.
I really appreciate that. And I'm also thinking about the phrase that Dimitry spoke about when he was with us around choosing love. And Natasha actually ends up choosing love over and over and over again simultaneously. And I think maybe the way we were looking at the trajectory of her life earlier was like, well, she'll either choose one or the other or none, but you actually either the president or her boyfriend or neither of them. And even now we're talking in a binary of like, oh, well, she chose to be a nun. But when I hear you speak and I think of what Dimitry mentioned, is this idea of constantly choosing love, right? Constantly until it feels right. She chose herself, Liliana says. Carrie, I would love if you're able to chat with us. I would love for you to talk about your that post experience, how it impacts this decision and time moving fast after trauma. I don't know if you can though. Maybe you can't. It's okay. But can we talk about that for a second? Time moves fast after trauma, right? Which is something that someone shared. How is that applicable in this moment, in this situation, the way the story ends with Natasha? How is it applicable to the present? And I see anyone that wants to unmute themselves, go ahead.
The thing about that scene, though, time really isn't moving fast, at least the way it is written. I mean, it is basically, it feels like 2 days, you know, when she, you know, post earthquake, she goes to see the Monsignor. After that, she goes to the convent. And then the next day or so, I guess, in another part of town, Alain's best friend is, you know, a good friend. Even though it was Philippe and Fabi. They're making plans to get married. I still feel like there could have been just an overt mention of, even like in that scene with her father, you know, where he is talking to her when she's a young girl and, you know, mention something about the convent or becoming a nun, or just mention something about the weight and importance of religion. You know, I mean, we know it's important because it's a, you know, in a Catholic country, which Haiti kind of basically is, religion and all of those stratas within religion, they kind of control everything. But we just, at least I didn't feel like we had, and Anais, you know, spoke eloquently about how she felt there were clues, but I didn't pick up on, they didn't feel like clues to me. It just felt like narrative to me.
Right. And I think Anais is also naming, and Anais, I'm not trying to put words in my mouth, that the narrative ultimately is the clue. Like that's what it is. It's not even like a clue necessarily, but it's like her story Natasha's story allows us to then understand why she would maybe choose to go back home or why she would choose that path. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, just, you know, like, why do we have to know? You know, why can't we discover it? Why can't the story be built as the story goes along? Why do we have to be given the clues? Even though I do think some of the things were clues, like the conversation with her father, you know, and her conflict, you know, that gets expressed there with what she's doing with her life and it not feeling right to her and her shame around that. I mean, if you want to call those clues. But, you know, I think it was, you know, I just, like, Dimitri's just an incredible writer. And that's what writers do. They choose how to write their books and how to, you know, create the story, you know, the craft of the writing. And that he surprised us. He even said it. He said, wait till the end. Wait till the end. He kept saying that.
Yeah.
And it's just like, to me, that's something beautiful about his writing, that he chose to do it in that way.
I am glad that he reintroduced Alain into the narrative, because for a while there, it was just Natasha's, you know, sort of going through the country and her narrative. And for a while, I thought that's how the book would end. And I was kind of preparing myself and kind of happy that the writer would take such a chance and not try to tie everything into a nice bow at the end. It would, to me, what I was expecting when I was in that part where he was just talking about Natasha and what she was going through, it felt like the equivalent of a earthquake. Like, you know, the mere fact that her narrative is this like surviving narrative felt very in line with the disaster that struck Haiti.
Is there anything else that's sticking out to folks? I'll specifically name, because the last part is written so beautifully. Even the epilogue has sort of a cadence to it. Are there any like little bits or little tidbits or sentences that people are like, oh, I love this, or like, what does he mean by this? Anything standing out?
The fact that it's
this is sort of goes in a mega direction instead of in a you know, a detailed direction. But I really liked, I think I agree with a lot of what Anais said, and I really liked the ending. But I liked it probably because I remember, you know, people were saying, you know, I hope she gets together with Alain. And when I was reading it, I was like, I kept thinking, I hope she doesn't. Like, I hope there's some, I hope I liked all the characters, which made the idea of a choice between two men feel like not adequate to the story. And then when we got there, she made a choice that kind of like did justice to everybody, especially herself. And that, and I loved that it opened up. Think about this when we read Evelise Rodriguez, and we were like, it's always either with a man or without a man. And here he broke the narrative and said, yeah, she decided to go for, you know, for she just decided to develop a different narrative. And I also think that people become nuns for lots of different reasons. And one of them is to, you know, because the traditional female narratives are limited or inadequate in some way, and a religious life offers a lot, and a lot of options, you know. So I also really like the end.
Yeah, I love that.
I also agree that, I'm sorry, go ahead, Yanni.
I was gonna say, I like that you just said that religious life being offers a lot of options, because I think people don't think that way. Because this image from the lay person, I guess, that's such a secluded life. But meanwhile, I like you just said it had offered a lot of options. I just want to say that.
Absolutely. And I think it allows me to look at the title clearer. God Loves Haiti. This idea of like her, you know, he talked about choosing love of country and patriotism. And I wonder how much of that is also deepened in her choice to go back to the continent, right? And like live in that sort of lifestyle, being that sort of person, having to choose a life that helps people connect themselves spiritually to these greater things, because Haiti's going through a lot at this time. And also to choose to be a nun is not like a laid back position, right? Like it's not paradise where you're choosing this sort of lifestyle. So I think I look at the title with a broader expansion now too, like Natasha choosing that and God Loves Haiti. I kind of like see the full circle of it. I'm like, oh, okay, Dimitry, you really are a poet. Look at you. Anything else sticking out to folks? Again, I'm curious to know if there are any specific lines, something that's like, oh, this moves me. Take a moment, you know. We have a whole hour together. There's no need to rush.
What was the significance of, I'm sure I just missed it, the guy dressed all in red, the
Somebody want to answer
his
that?
friend, he has on a red top hat, red suit. I was just like, wow, there must be some significance in all that red. Maybe that might be a tradition in Haiti. I don't know, but
Looking.
I don't. It's funny you said that because I'm from Haitian background, although I grew up here, and I did think of that when I was reading it, the red. But I know when Haitians talk about dreaming, like red is victorious. It's supposed to be victory. You know, it's not like it's the opposite of mourning. You know, but it's definitely I've heard Haitians as victorious color. You wore red. You know, so there's something there. And I don't know if they want to talk about voodoo. I've been studying red, you know, some of the laws. This red is represents something, but it's definitely positive and
Right.
victory.
No, yeah, I was gonna say that I think I'm very much, when I read that part, the man in all red, I assumed that it was like an honor of something within the religion, right? And you know, similar to like you know, or something like that, one of these different religious deities. That's what I
You know,
thought.
not necessarily in Catholicism,
No,
in
but
voodoo,
you know,
in voodoo.
Catholic
In
is
voodoo.
Catholic, Buddhist, that whole thing.
No, in
But
voodoo.
definitely the red
It's
victorious.
voodoo.
Yeah. So I
Yeah, the
just figured,
chapter's called The Voodoo Wedding.
Yeah.
I just thought it was like a religious deity within that. Carrie, this is a great thought. I wonder if Natasha will reveal or hint to Phoenix that she's her mother as they continue living their life. The truth is always revealed at one point. I mean, there seems to be a connectivity within community anyway, because the Phoenix is being raised by Alain. So I don't see them hiding that from her. You know what I mean? Like I see maybe that being an open understanding, but I don't know. What do other
She
folks?
does reveal it to Phoenix when after Elaine dies.
She does. If I remember well.
It's in the epilogue.
You got that, Carrie?
It's like almost the last paragraph of the epilogue, where Natasha then, this is 258, Natasha then told her daughter the story of the love triangle and the disaster that surprisingly made everything right. All Nikki appreciated from the secret history of her parents was that finally she had someone on earth she could call mom. Like her mother, she hated to be alone.
Very beautiful then. She seems to embrace that idea that Natasha is her mother. I'm gonna go on to Liliana's thought, but you know, we're going back and forth. Liliana's name, I enjoyed reading the conversation between Monsignor and Natasha about how the earthquake is a form of love. Yes, can we get into that? Can we go to that? I feel that was a pivotal point for her to reflect and leading to become a nun. Liliana, I know you typed it out, but I'd love if you want to contribute anything else, because that's probably to me the best part about this ending, that and the epilogue. So
Can you hear me?
yes.
Okay, sweet. I was trying to speak earlier and no one was responding to me. Okay. No, I literally stop in those lines because in times of crisis and things that you don't have control and you're just asking why, like that is a really hard conversation to see as a form of love. Like I first why are we having this conversation? How an earthquake is a form of love in any sense? Like it's such a mass destruction in people's life and everything. And you know, this was a time like for, and I guess for many, I think also the pandemic and a lot of us brought a lot of changes, like a lot of people changing jobs and getting more closer with family. So I am assuming from her decision in becoming a nun that was a time for her again to choosing herself and seeing what was more important. Like obviously she was having such a dilemma, chaotic world where she couldn't choose and she was so dissatisfied. I don't know, am I saying it correctly? But she wasn't content with her decisions and the life choices. So I mean, yeah, this was a really hard time for her to reflect, but it brought her clarity in terms like this is a test. This is like a test for me to realize and put myself first into finding that self-love and you know how that came about. So yeah, like I thought that was like a really good paragraph too.
Yeah. Is there a part of it that like sticks out to you, Anais? I don't know if you found it. Did you find it? Were you
It's
looking
page
for it?
203
Page
is
2?
where that whole conversation takes place,
Mm-hmm.
where he talks about the test, and then more and more. He says a lot there.
Yeah.
Wow, he says a whole lot there.
I'm going to give folks a second if you want to go back and look at that. Just want us to all catch the vibe that we're throwing at each other, right? Make sure. But yeah, that's such a beautiful part. And definitely, I agree with you, Liliana. I too felt like, okay, reflecting in her story, that's probably when she made the decision, right? Like after talking about the earthquake and what that impact would be, she kind of walked away from that conversation like, oh shit, I need to do something.
Mhm.
Because to your point, she was fed up, I think, with like her life choices, something that we mentioned earlier, and like who she had become in all of this. So yeah, I really, really agree with that. And I love that you brought that up.
Should I read that little paragraph or no?
Yeah, I would love if you'd want to, just so we can all like hear it.
I
If you don't
mean,
want
if you want to read it, because I don't think my
to,
it's on a test on 203.
it's on page 2. Oh no, but I have the audio book. I have it right. I have the link. I guess I can go to that, but that's weird.
Oh,
You
okay.
hear the audio
I can read
presentation.
it then. I'm
I would
not
love
gonna
for
make
you
it
to read
work.
it, Liliana. And by the way, you said the word dissatisfied. Perfect. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So it's on 203 in the middle. A test, child. Godoo was a test. That's all it was, a test. You read your share of Bible stories. You know God puts the people he loves the most through the worst sacrifices. If you ask me, this is one of the easiest tests we face in a long time. I don't have to continue. I'll stop there.
Continue reading, Liliana, if
Okay.
it's okay.
Yeah.
Because the next
reading.
paragraph is really, I think, is where he teaches her the lessons.
All right. The priest chuckled, then coughed. Why do you say that, Father? Well, for one, it wasn't subtle. It was so loud I still can't hear anyone more than a meter away from me. Every Haitian alive knows it happened, got its message. I responded to it in a way that revealed the limits and strength of their character and faith. They know how to improve their standing with God and Jesus based on their behavior. Jesus still loves them, but they will find lying about who they are and could be to themselves much harder. Second, the damage the earthquake caused was more physical. Rebounding from physical loss, even on that scale, should be a piece of cake for a people who so oddly recover from decades of slavery. The old Port-au-Prince was a city that inherited. The new city will be the one they create for themselves. It's rare opportunity to start one over fresh. You don't get many of those in this life. Can they? Can you? It's not a bad question. You could be facing worse challenges. You know.
Yeah, right. The idea that this sort of physical loss, regardless of how immense it is actually easier, right? Given what they've gone through. It's beautiful. Can we give a little wave and a thank you to Liliana for reading that aloud? I love when we get to bring the words aloud. Yeah, that's just gorgeous. I want to name something that Paula mentioned. And I guess Paula, this is just like you found this part beautiful or relevant, right? Natasha goes on. Go hates the if you look at Go hates the Republic on 141 when she's fallen palace, but works through Monsignor's God Loves Haitians on 204, and he explains Haitians as chosen people. And then she deals with grave diggers, finding life in closest physical contact with death. And then when Liliana says God hate, when they're talking about God hates Haiti, this is actually, I mean, not God hates Haiti. I read that way, but this is actually the antithesis of that notion, right? That like all of this abuse or all of this turmoil, slavery, all of these things that have happened to the people of Haiti aren't indicators of them being hated or slighted by God, right? But rather are indicators not only of capacity, but like what they can build for themselves. It's not just, oh, what they've gone through, but what they're able to hold for themselves as a people. And I think everyone tonight is like touching on those things. And that's kind of what Dimitry was leading to. And Liliana names, yes, most resilient individuals. But I think, and I agree with you, but and often if as a resilient individual, or if you know resilient individuals, the lens is always framed as in spite of, you know, it's not necessarily like what you can do with resilience. Being resilient is like a praise to what you did in spite of everything you had to go through. And I think to Paula's notion and to what we're talking about tonight and what Dimitry has even mentioned, you know, the resiliency of Haiti's people isn't in spite of, but it's an indicator of like what is theirs and what they deserve and what they can build and what can come to them. Did I trip us out, or like we're here on the same page? All right, good. We're here. Y'all tripped me out. Y'all said this, not me. Beautiful. Anything else coming up? How do we feel about where the president's left off from where we last read him to the end? How do we feel? Do we feel any type of way? Do we miss having more of his story? Do we just like that we're centered on Natasha?
I like that in the epilogue, his name is Gene. So in the epilogue, they talk about Uncle Gene. So, you know, before, I think it was Paula who said, Paula said about she has all her loves. In the end, she winds up, she doesn't have to choose, she doesn't choose. So in the end, she has this relationship with the president, you know, as the uncle to her daughter, you know, and so there's this way that she has all of them in her life, and that's the role that Gene plays, you know, the president plays. That's what he goes on to do. We don't know everything else, you know, or anything else that he goes on as a president, but we know in some ways what he goes on to do as a man and as a human, you know, which is to embrace his, you know, Natasha's child that wasn't from him. That's really interesting. He embraces the child. He was so jealous of Alain and so fearful that he was going to take Natasha away. And then in the end, you know, the church or God takes Natasha away to the convent and to nunnery. And he embraces the child that wasn't his, that was actually Alain's. I think that's really very beautiful.
Tremendous. And yeah, that was the point I wanted to touch. I just want to name what Carrie said really quickly, that he didn't lose to Alain, right? Because there was this internal competition within Jean. I always make the assumption that it's Jean, but it could be Jean.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't know.
Since it's
Yeah, I
French,
don't
I
know
would
French.
imagine
I don't know
Jean.
French.
That's what I'm saying. French is John, but you know, what do I know? Anyway, Carrie, naming that he didn't, you know, that competition that he has built up for our time with him, watching him throughout his presidency and mostly through his marriage, right? Because I think he compares himself. Look, that conversation at St. Peter, now that we can get through all the way to the end, the conversation with St. Peter and the different versions of presidents, I think it's still him comparing himself to the men in his mind who are on his level and deem some sense of admiration or importance. And yeah, him not only choosing to accept this, I guess, Natasha's choice, but also choosing to accept the baby is like, that's a way for him to choose himself, right? And to be less concerned with what does it look like to stack against other men. And I think that that's, to your point, Anais, that was mind changing to me, because I was like, wow, he's her uncle. Like there's a love there, you know, like there's and that girl now has, not that girl, Phoenix now has a grander sense of family, right? Than perhaps if they were just married and it was just them alone. So I think that's really important.
Doesn't the president try to send Alain out of the country though?
Yeah.
To, you know, under the guise of helping him with medical care. So he did, I mean, he's a good guy, but he did try to get Alain out of the country. near the end of the book.
Well,
At
that was when
gunpoint.
he was in his jealousy phase before he realizes her going to become a nun just changes everything.
Yeah,
And it changes him. It changes him.
yeah. You were gonna
Yeah,
say
it
something?
almost. Go ahead. Yeah, it almost
No.
like it. What was that?
Go
We
ahead,
were
Greg.
just trying to make sure you could speak. That we both like, no, you gonna say something great? You gonna say something great? You got it.
Yeah, I mean, it almost like lapsed into comic book villain territory, I feel. And I'm glad that it wound up not going that direction with how they treat him, the fact that his goons at gunpoint, and then Alan like smooth talks his way out of it. I feel like I've just seen that so often in fiction and in television and movies and everything. And it's like, really,
Yeah.
they're gonna kill this guy? They can't possibly. And I know they wanted to bring all three of them together at the end, which I also think they didn't necessarily have to do that. You know, I felt like it was a little too neat with like, oh, all three of them wound up in the same place. And it's like, but thankfully, you know, he didn't actually kill him or have his men shoot him. But yeah, that was like sort of a hiccup that I could have done without.
Yeah.
That all the three of them whining in the same place.
Yeah, that not only that, but that the gunpoint thing too. Like,
Oh yeah. Yeah, it was giving Dick Tracy for sure.
Bobo. Bobo.
Oh, we have someone joining us? Cool. Oh no, someone's coming back on. I guess I'm curious now about what sort of narrative was this? How would you describe this? If someone's like, oh, what kind of genre is that? Is it a poetic narrative? Is it a romance novel? Is it like depth and self-realization? How would you as the reader and personally describe this book to someone? Because I think even Dimitry has a hard time pinning it down, and I wonder what we think.
I don't know how to describe it, but his descriptions of the smell of death still lingers with me, and what that, I'm going to say what it must have felt like, even though it was a smell, because it felt so visceral. And I mean, obviously, you know, the average person doesn't experience death on that level, but it just felt so grotesque almost. And they kept referring to having that smell on them or bodies decomposing. That is what kind of like stuck with me. Again, I would have been happier if they didn't tie the book up so neatly at the end. But those descriptions of what post-earthquake Haiti must have been like felt really visceral.
Right. And I just want to keep reminding us that, like, I think part of Dimitri's goal that he talked about when he was with us, and even aside with all of the things that we saw together as a group, articles and videos and so on, he does mention wanting to paint Haiti in a more romantic light, right? Like he says that it's important to kind of romanticize and understand death, loss, and pain through the lens of being able to gain something. And I think that his way of tying things at the end together is another form of literary or poetic license to be able to get to that point in the story. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if it's necessarily tied together as much as if he's just naming like, but people will be able to move on. And these are the ways that they do, as opposed to being like, here's all the shit that also didn't work out. You know what I mean? Because ultimately it is a love story. How do we feel about that contradiction? I think it's romantic, Susan said. How do we feel about that? Is it easier to have that lens and see the book being tied up in that way? Because I think when we say tie up in loose ends, it feels like he's sweeping things under the rug, which he's not. I think we're very much aware of how precarious and how dangerous and how deadly, you know, things are in Haiti at this time, and even post certain conversations, right? Like that awareness is there. It's the allusion to that conversation with the Monsignor. Like, this is actually how people have been able to navigate. And I think him tying it up in a certain, I'm not going to use the word tie up because I just said not to. Him writing the end in the way that he did and being able to like place things and give us a resolution, maybe is a way to name that, right? Is poetic license itself. My opinion,
Mhm.
you know, it's a love story again.
It is a love story for sure.
Yeah. And
Even even self-love, what Natasha does, is out of love for herself, really.
mhm.
I think it was
In a
also,
healthy way. What's that, Anais?
I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's all right. I was finished.
I was going to say, it's also a love story with the Haitian people.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt very moved. I actually feel emotional right now,
Mm-hmm.
thinking about all the ways I feel given to through the stories and through, like even with that part about with the Monsignor, when he talks about the test, and he's talking about the Haitian people and what they've been through and how, how it's just it's like Dimitri's love for his country, for his people, and giving us, I felt like he's giving us his people, like, and what's significant, what makes them who they are as Haitians, that they went through, centuries of slavery, that they've been through 100 years of 200 years, he said, 200 years of economic blockade, just the ways he spells that out, that they went through 200 years of, political governments that, didn't, come through for the people, that were either failed in corruption, and yet, and not even just like you said earlier, not just, and Paula, despite, and yet, look who these people are. It's like, this is who these people are. Like they were forged in this experience, this historic experience. And I just feel so given to by how he created this story. It's on so many different levels. It's a love story, but to me, like a romantic love story. And at the same time, it's this really deep love of the Haitian people.
You know what I've noticed, and in Barbara's book club, we're reading Everything Inside by Edwidge Dandicott now, and she's a Haitian author. And I don't know if this is fair to say, but all of the stories feel that the book we're reading now, as well as the short stories of Edwidge, none of these stories are based in joy. They're all based in some kind of traumatic incident happening to Haitians as individuals, or as an entire country, and how they deal with whatever different challenge and sort of come out of it. And I'm just wondering if that's indicative of Haitian writers, in the same way the Monsignor sort of goes down a list of trauma as to why God loves Haiti. It feels like in all of these stories, plus this book we're reading, it's the same kind of trauma that, love must come out of trauma. And I know you must have that sort of good, evil plot twist in a book, but it feels, I haven't read enough Haitian authors to say it feels unique to Haitian writers, but there is a parallel between these books. And I just wonder if other Haitian writers sort of come from that place of tragedy.
I think I appreciate the connection, and that definitely makes sense, the correlation, especially if you think about Edwidge and Dimitry. I mean, one of the first things we did as a group was watch Edwidge and Dimitry chat together, right? And talk a little bit about writing style. I don't know if folks remember that, but part of that notion, I think, is that you can't ignore this universal sense of identity, right? Like, so if you were to write about Haitian identity or being Haitian, I don't know how you not include some of this other things that people include, but I'm also naming that I think Dimitry even named that in writing this book, Edwidge was one of the authors that he turned most to when he was doing preparation for the book. So what you could also be sensing, Ron, is that correlation. Maybe there's an ode and an homage to her particular style of writing. Edwidge is also a poet, right? So like there's so many ways to interpret like that love and that pain and that tragedy, because I think when you're doing it in poetic form, it can feel those similarities are noted, right? Like you can note that. But yeah, I don't know, to your point, yeah, I don't think it would be safe to assume that all Haitian writers write out of a sense of tragedy, but I think given Haiti's history of liberation and navigating colonial power, how do you write about the horse and not describe its mane? Well, damn, I just came up with that. Somebody copyright that. How do you write about the horse and not describe its mane? But how do you write about the thing and not tell what did it? I don't know, y'all. I'm LOL, right? But what do y'all think about it? As much as I was joking, that was a deep thought.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that? Like,
Well, yeah, write that one for first point. Write that down before you forget it.
all right,
That.
I'm doing
Yeah, you
that.
need to write that down.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's exactly what I was thinking. I don't think it's necessarily unique to Haitian writers. I think it'd be unique to any writers who have come from any colonized peoples, is what it boils down to. So it's like, yeah, you can't disentangle trauma through, like you said, colonial, settler colonialism, any type of colonial power. So I think that's what it boils down to. I don't think it's necessarily just Haitian. And then this gets us to circle back to, you were talking about earlier about the God Loves Haitians part. And it kind of rubbed me the wrong way, this idea of, and it's a very Christian idea, of the idea that there's a virtue in suffering. So that automatically, God is testing these people, whether they be Haiti, whether it be any other country that is under the foot of any type of imperialism. And that's this noble thing. It's like, well, yes, if they're rising up or they're continuing on in spite of being under that boot, doesn't necessarily make that virtuous. It's like they've been dealt a shitty hand, and there are systemic forces that led to that, is what it boils down to. And yet the Christian orthodoxy will tell you, well, no, that means just that God loves you too much, as the Monsignor said. Oh, maybe God loves us too much.
Right.
The reasoning for that. And I don't know, it just like rubbed me the wrong way.
No, yeah, I appreciate that, because it's what we're talking about, resiliency, right? Like, is it a compliment to be known as resilient if it's because in spite of you get all this shit done, or you neglect yourself, whatever, in the name of resiliency? And I think for me, the connection, it was more of a poetic connection, like Natasha choosing God, right? And if God loves Haiti, then Natasha's choosing Haiti and choosing that love for the great of the country. But I'm a huge romantic, as y'all know, so maybe that's not even what she meant. And I love that point you're making, Greg, because to reiterate, yes. And Ron, I think you made this point too earlier, that like Haitian identity, the way that Westerns navigate Haitian is through like a pseudo Christian identity. And it's this idea that like, no, you have to keep suffering. It's what we in the West impose in Haiti, almost like you have to keep suffering because that means God loves you best because you're still here. So like, thank you for naming that connection, because it's so true. And yes, I was just taking poetic license where I don't have any.
I think that I'm glad he really prays before he does any writing. I really like that about him.
Right. I forgot about that. Yeah, Susan, you're totally right. His own connection, his own spiritual connection, and navigating. Just because you have a connection spiritually with God or whoever doesn't mean that it's smooth. It doesn't mean that it's unrelenting, like I think Dimitry probably is more whole as a person, and I think he's constantly questioning and balancing that relationship with God as well. And I think praying is a part of that, like being able to check in and being like, wait a minute, I'm writing these grand themes and these ideas. Like, do I actually even have that with you before I pretend to write about before I proclaim to write about how the people of Haiti have it for you? Do I have it for you? And I think that's an amazing connection. Shout out to you, Susan. Thank you. Very true. Very real.
Yeah, he even starts his acknowledgements on page 259. He says, first, I have to give thanks and praise to God for all the love the novel has received from readers worldwide. So that's the first, entity that he's going to give thanks to is to God.
How beautiful.
I've never seen another writer say that, under acknowledgements.
Yeah.
I acknowledge the editor, and I acknowledge my friends, and I acknowledge my family, and I've never seen another writer in the acknowledgements start out that way and give thanks and praise to God.
Yeah. Very powerful. It reminds me of Audrey's autobiography, where she in her thanks in the back, she mentions Hecate, but it's a one-line thing, and it's not. She was famous.
She mentions who?
Hecate, which is a African goddess. Hecate. They're the same. But it's very different from having that spiritual shout out is very different from being actually want to praise God in this moment. It reminds me of when actors win awards. And they'd be I want to start by praising God. I think that was really rooted, yeah.
Yeah, I had a thought about what you were saying earlier, Greg. I thought that was really, very powerful and really helpful to kind of bring that in about, the role of the church and religion, can often be to rationalize and give some rationale for why people are so, oppressed. And I thought it's interesting that with Dimitry being a spiritual person and being religious, and the way we're just talking about it now, how he's also very political in the book. He really continuously interweaving the history of the oppression and colonialism and yet it's kind of an interesting kind of contradiction, because on the one hand he says it really clear, like what you're saying, Greg. He says it really clear about how Haiti has, quote, been fucked over, over all of these centuries. And yet then he's so clearly, Catholic. I really was very impacted. I didn't particularly know that about Haitians and Haitian society being so Catholic. And he's so Catholic. The whole language, the whole framework is very Catholic. It's very Catholic. So it's very interesting, that it's so political and anti-colonialist. And at the same time, it's the contradiction that, Greg, you're raising, that at the same time, Catholicism and religion often just, is a rationale for exploitation and oppression. So it's a kind of funny contradiction of the book.
Absolutely. And in Port-au-Prince, we know historically that Catholicism, huge drives of Catholicism are what allowed the slave trade to move swimmingly through Port-au-Prince, right? Them being able to give their money and funding and setting up. So always remembering too that the political, which y'all know this better than me, the political state of an area is very much interdependent with the religion and how that plays for us in colonization, right? The colonizer's religion is always key to, I always forget this gets recorded. I'm whoever clicks on this one day is going to be this girl, anti-everything. But it's important to name, right? It's important to name that Catholicism has pushed much of the slave trade throughout many places, particularly in the Caribbean, right? That is major.
Well, the Catholic Church in Spain was the, I don't know how to say it, began the slave trade. It's kind of sent the explorers out and paid for it and colonized Latin America. And it was all under the slave trade. I mean, all under the Catholic Church.
Right.
And all the other countries, Britain and Portugal, and use their own version of, religion to rationalize and justify what they were doing, the annihilation of Native Americans. But as you know, we're saying Catholicism in particular was what was behind the colonialization of Latin America and the Caribbean. And that was in the 1400s. Forget the 1600s. They were 200 years ahead.
Years ahead of it. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for naming that. Yep. Everyone's just nodding or like, yeah. I see it in the group chat. And I guess, yeah, that is an interesting juxtaposition when you think about, especially an academic mind, right? That we can presume that the Dimitri's of academic mind and still being able to have a strong sense of religion. And again, I wonder what that internal navigation is like. I wonder if he's super comfortable in being religious, or I wonder if because he's Haitian and because of all of that historical resonance, if there's some tension in that within himself, which I guess we'll never know, but he seems open enough to chat about it, but I can see that.
He might have another book in him.
Say it again, Ron.
He might have another book in him that
Oh,
will
yes.
explore that.
Oh yes. Let's all hope so. I want to name that Liliana said how you cope with all that oppression, imperialism, natural crisis, etc. This is when people often turn to religion to make sense of things in order to move forward. Again, so just naming that, we could also probably pinpoint that that's where the most exploitation can happen, right? Particularly in Catholicism and stuff like that. And it's why certain group churches target certain places and certain people, right? Like certain churches go to different countries on different missions to target certain people of certain demographic, right? And I think that has a lot to do with what we're naming. Oh, yes, he told us yes, Paula, y'all are really remembering things that I forgot. Dimitry told us that he was reading Conversations with God, 200 Years of African-American Prayers, right, for Easter, and sort of how beautiful that was, because to him, the prayers felt like poems. In my mind, I was like, that sounds about right, right? Because a lot of proverbs and things like that are very poetically written. So like, yeah, naming that maybe he's doing it for the poetry, right? I'll say I'm not Dimitry, right? I didn't write God Loves Haiti. But for me, I personally have a relationship with a church, right? And it was the poetry that kind of pulled me in at first, or at least from a very little girl, my first memories of wanting to listen or wanting to pay attention in mass, aside from my grandma or my mom poking at me, was because like, oh, this sounds like poetry. Or like, I was amazed how my grandma and my mom would memorize certain verses or certain parts of mass. And I was like, oh, this is like a poem. This is like not performing, but this is like reciting. I was so into that. And as an adult, I kind of still have that. I read the Bible for the poetry. I'm not reading the Bible every week. Everyone calm down. But I do. I read it for the poetry. And for mass, there are certain notions that if my pastor shares it with me, or if my minister shares it with me, I'll go back to it because it just sounds so beautiful. And I want those words to carry me. So I definitely see that. What's happening here? Oh, Ron put up a great link if you want to familiarize yourself with the book that Dimitry is reading. I believe someone shared that they bought this book, right? I don't know if that person's here this week or if they were here last week, but I believe someone was like, oh, I just bought Conversations with God. But if you click
I
this.
think that was me, but it
Yeah.
wasn't Conversation with God. It
Oh,
was
no.
how to make
it was how to make,
love
yes.
Negro.
Yes. Sorry. Different book.
Completely the opposite.
Right. So you haven't read this. You haven't read this. All right. Cool.
No.
I'm about to call you like, Liliana, tell us about this book. Well, I just clicked it on the link and it looks awesome. A unique and moving collection of prayers by African Americans spanning 2 centuries, sold mad copies, powerful testament of faith and hope. And I want to name that this is not a new narrative necessarily, right? That like people who have gone through oppression are exploited to a certain extent and then put under these labels of resiliency or under strength. But I think that is why it's important to read God Loves Haiti in a whole, because I think it allows you to shift or redefine what you think is important when it comes to resilience or when it comes to strength. Is it that people survive it, or is it all of the many things that are due to them? You know what I mean? I'm trying to word this in a way that's not offensive. I feel like a bad analogy is coming on. You know how I do. I mean, let's just say that in my personal life, right, I've gone through things and I don't navigate my life like, oh, I deserve this because I never had all of these other things, or I don't know what that experience is. I navigate my life thinking like, you know what? I've been through difficult things. I actually know that all of the greatness that is to come my way is because, not because I've built capacity, but because I'm past that. I'm past the difficult. Like I'm actually, the good is to come to me. So what I'm naming, or what I'm saying is that not a constant narrative for people in oppression? Or do we assume that people are navigating life or navigating things in spite of? Does this book make you change how you have that conversation in your personal life and with the people around you? I'm not asking you to answer now, but if you want to, that's fine. But this is more rhetorical. Maybe we've been looking, maybe the lens of the conversation for too long for even us has been like, in spite of, and it's because the influences of the church and the way of our Western identity. But maybe reading this book now can allow us to look at things in life and not look at it in spite of, but more of what's to come. The capacity, not even that I've earned, the capacity that I've built myself. Oh, thank you, Ron. Okay, people want to purchase Conversations with God. Great. Ron is reposting the link to How to Make Love to a Negro Without Getting Tired. If you want to make that purchase as well. But I hope we're able to walk away and really reconsider what does it look like? What does the conversation of resiliency look like? And yeah, we're talking about the people of Haiti, but I want you to transfer it for yourself. Right? What do you deserve? Not because you've been resilient, but what do you deserve because you yourself know what you're capable of? It has nothing to do with resiliency, but it has to do everything with what you hold. Again, just because we go through something bad or we're navigating something that's not great, it's not always in spite of. And I wonder if we put those limiting goggles on ourselves before we even get to the issue. And if you find yourself resonating with something I'm saying, then like that's something to consider, right?
I'm thinking a little bit about what you're saying, Paula. I mean, it's very profound what you're saying. So I'm working to take it in, like in a deep way.
Yeah.
And what comes to me is like, it's the difference between being related to or relating to oneself as a victim, like the despite of, the resilient thing. Yep. Like those people, they're so resilient. It's really kind of part of a paradigm of putting those people, just relating to them as victims. Right. And what I hear you saying is it's about empowerment.
Right.
It's about us being empowered, us finding our, whatever it is, finding our core, finding our center, us being capable, like people are capable of building a life. And it doesn't have to be this. I'm saying again what you're saying, but this is how I'm hearing it. Mm-hmm. Like people are capable of building a life just because they're capable. And if you relate to people as victims, you don't relate to them as capable.
Absolutely.
And when you relate to people as capable, you see them as empowered, as capable of being empowered. And it's very interesting what you're saying.
Thank you. The last thought to that thread, because that's literally everything I'm trying to say. The last little part I would add is because then it allows you to see yourself. Mm-hmm. I think that's where we have blockages as a people all the time. Like even the idea of those people are so resilient, you see yourself in a different capacity. But if you've had any sort of hardship before and you've had to get over it, or if you've had any sort of disappointing moment in life where you've had to be able to move forward, then like you too are those people. If those people, we the people, us the people, oh, me, that's me. I'm Natasha. I'm Haiti even. And that may feel crazy depending on your identity, who you are in the world, how you present yourself. That may feel crazy, but it doesn't mean it's any less true, right? The idea that that sort of empathy that you're talking about, Anais, building for oneself allows you to then have it for yourself. And what I've learned, what life has taught me, and God bless me, what I've been shown is like those who are able to see empathy within themselves can see me. And they're not as hard on me because they see themselves in me and they're like, oh, I've been there. Let's regroup. Let's blah, 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 whatever. And I hope in this conversation, maybe next week in a different book, maybe on Saturday when you're talking to someone you love and we think about this conversation we're having tonight and the book in general, I hope we're able to walk away from this particular book in seeing ourselves, seeing that admiration, that love, that respect, that ultimately people of Haiti don't choose or even forged into, right? Like we were naming because of white colonialism, white supremacy, but because that's their capacity, that's what they have in them. And I hope you can see it within yourself. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, Liliana, we need a podcast on Paula. Listen, from your words to God or whoever, if you don't believe in God, whoever, whatever, your mom, whoever we believe in, from your words to their lips, let's make that happen. I will donate for the rest of my life to Literary Freedom Project to ensure that it survives if I get a little pod. Resilience is led by faith and hope, ultimately, right? And I think what we're naming too, because Carrie said that in the chat, resilience is led by faith and hope. Ultimately, again, what we're naming is that resilience is led by faith and hope, and it's the faith and the hope, not in spite of, but it's the faith in oneself, the faith in those around us, the faith and the hope that we're able to actually accomplish or get to or hit that goal, right? Because resilience is not, oh, I hope I'm strong enough, or not. It's not even, oh, God is going to get me through this, or my partner has my back, or me and my daughter are going to be able to fix this, right? Like that's not even it. It's one's own capacity. Oh my gosh, y'all are gassing this podcast idea. A lot of depth coming from Young P tonight. But I really do appreciate us being able to read this and this kind of being our first book back, because it does set up a bit of a theme. I want us to all bring our minds and be cognizant that we'll be reading Black Skin, White Masks. You know, I always, when I'm talking to people, I'm like, yeah, you know, Black mask, white skin. I never say it right. We're going to be reading Black Skin, White Masks, right? Is anyone familiar with this title or with the author? I mean, Fana.
Yeah, I've read it.
Is that big?
I love Frantz Fanon.
Perfect.
You know, I'm so grateful you have that book. I have that book and keep saying I want to read it. I just love the way he looks at, you know, colonialism and culture and language, how those are major tools. Language is a tool to use against people to control them. So I'm looking forward to reading the book. I'm familiar with Frantz Fanon.
I love that. Yeah. Thank you. Greg, I saw that you said you just finished reading it. What are your thoughts?
No, there was an early quarantine read. So yeah, I've read it, but look forward to doing it with a book club to actually break it down with other people. Cause it's a lot to digest. It's not necessarily a simple read.
No, yeah, it's not. I mean, I think I read this when I was 18 and I remember being like, yeah, sounds right. Sounds about right. So I am excited now that I have a little bit of ideology of my own, and I'm more excited to no longer be 18, right? To be able to like revisit some of these notions, even though Ron, I know you turn 18 tonight. Don't worry, you'll catch up. I want to read.
I want to
22.
22. Oh, sorry, I forgot. He can get into bars. I want to read this little synopsis because I have people like, oh, what's this book about? Let's just get on the same page together. Black Skin, White Masks. Few modern voices have had as a profound an impact on the Black identity and critical race theory as Frantz Fanon, and Black Skin, White Mask represents some of his most important work. Fanon's masterpiece, now available in a new translation. That's very important. That's very important. And we're actually going to talk about that next week before we get into the book, because I did some great research on, there was some tension between that old translation and new translation. And I want to talk about it as a group. That updates.
Well, he's from Martinique. He's Francophone.
Right. Right. So there was the original translator, there was like just a racist notion and they had to move things around, and it was on NPR. I found it. I was like, oh, this is a cool tidbit. So we're going to share and talk about it. So yeah, it's updated in languages for a new generation of readers. We're going to get into it next week. Just a reminder that those dates are May 5th, 10th, 17th, and 24th, right? On a Tuesday. Yes. That's the 23rd, you're trying to say? Okay, so it's not, the last one is the 23rd, not the 24th. Our apologies. We'll get that fixed on all of our platforms as soon as possible.
And I purchased the book already. I can't wait to read it.
Excellent. Thank you. I wanted to also remind folks that if you're able to put people on, as my generation would say, or just share with people that we have a book club on Tuesdays, let them know it's free. Let them know we don't mind if folks don't have the book yet. If anyone needs support in getting the book, reach out to myself or Ron. You know, we'll make that happen. But we have 7 minutes together. It's not really time to go. I'm going to read these chapters aloud, and then I want to get any last thoughts, either around what we just finished reading or what we're about to read. Does that sound cool? Great. So these last the dates for the chapters for the next book. I just say them aloud so I can remember myself, right? Because as y'all know, I don't remember. So May 3rd is chapters 1 through 3. Okay, that's pages 8 through 60. We bang those out. Then for the 10th, it's going to be chapters 4 and 5. That's pages 61 to 108. Then for the 17th, that'll be chapter 6, 109 to 162. And then for the 23rd, it'll be chapter 7 and 8, 163 and 181. And of course, you can always go to onebrox.com to get all of that information. But just make sure that for next week, you've at least gotten somewhere past page 8 and you can stop at page 60. Okay, so make sure we're on that route. Any thoughts that anyone wants to share about this new book that we're getting into? If you've read it before, if you have anything that's standing out already, it's okay if you don't, no pressure. Okay, good. And even though it's like slightly uncomfortable, we have to honor the people we love when they're with us, right? It's not in spite of, right? We just learned all of that today. So I'm going to do a quick rendition and y'all could like join in, do little hand movements. But we're going to wish Ron a happy birthday. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Ron. Ronald, Ron, our man, RK. Love you. Happy birthday to you. But then I just got a happy birthday to you. Happy birthday. We love you so much, Ron.
Thank you.
I hope that this was a good way for you to spend your birthday. Are you doing anything a little bit cooler?
Not today, no,
Okay.
but on the weekend. But whoever authored happy birthday should sue y'all.
They're not gonna get no money out of me. Okay.
For singing it so poorly.
Well, not me. I did it with all my love.
Thank you. But I do sincerely thank you all for all the birthday wishes. So thank you for that.
You're really a great person and you deserve it.
I do deserve a birthday.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.